This is an AI recreation of one of Hitler's speeches. Listen to the original here.
Meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin. In connection with the Jewish question.
This is January 30th, 1939, 7 months before the start of World War II.
I have this to say. It is a shameful spectacle to see how the whole democratic world is oozing sympathy for the poor, tormented Jewish people, but remains hard-hearted and obdurate when it comes to helping them.
Give a little bit of context here for what was happening at the moment. Jews in Germany at the time were viewed very much like immigrants. They were effectively like, they weren't pure German, so they didn't belong there. Kind of like Mexicans in the United States, how they're treated, how Trumpist extremists view them and talk about them, even if they're full citizens in the U.S., even if they've lived here for generations, they don't belong here in their mind. Keep that in the back of your head as you listen.
Obdurate when it comes to helping them, which is surely, in view of its attitude, an obvious duty. The arguments that are brought up as an excuse for not helping them actually speak for us Germans and Italians. For this is what they say. 1, we, that is the democracies, are not in a position to take in the Jews.
So he's saying that, I guess, Italy, I don't know, what other places, Spain and Britain and France and others said that they're not in a position to take in Jewish immigrants, so they have to stay in Germany. In reality, Jews were all scattered across Europe. They were all over the place. So it's not like Germany was the only country that had immigrants there. Or they're not even immigrants. They're people who've lived there for like their whole lives. But Germany is trying to push them out the door, force them somewhere else until shortly before this. You know, I don't even think that Germany was trying to do that. I think that he was using that as an excuse. I think Hitler was trying to take them out and whipping people into a blood frenzy over this. I think that's pretty obvious.
Yet in these empires, there are not 10 people to the square kilometer, while Germany, with her 135 inhabitants to the square kilometer, is supposed to have room for them. 2, they assure us we cannot take them unless Germany is prepared to allow them a certain amount of capital to bring with them as immigrants. For hundreds of years, Germany was good enough to receive these elements, although they possessed nothing except infectious political and physical diseases.
Wow, that's super interesting. What was that he said?
For hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years. So these people have lived here for hundreds of years, what he's saying. They're not immigrants. He viewed Jewish people at the time as immigrants because they weren't pure blood German. Anybody that's not pure, white, Caucasian, preferably blue-eyed, blonde-haired German doesn't belong. Although he was Austrian. That's, you know, we're going to pretend that's not the case. He pretended it wasn't the case. If you take this information and apply it to our situation in America, just think about what's happening. People saying that the U.S. shouldn't house immigrants, that there's a border crisis, we need to deport, there's going to be a massive deportation effort. Is this sounding familiar at all?
Germany was good enough to receive these elements, although they possessed nothing except infectious political and physical diseases. What they possess today, they have by a very large extent gained at the cost of the less astute German nation by the most reprehensible manipulations. Today, we are merely paying this people what it deserves.
Leading up to this moment, World War I started with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, right, from Austria-Hungary. That was a country, Austria-Hungary, one country, that was to the southeast of Germany, I believe. And the person that did it was a Serb, so allegedly. So the Austria-Hungary government used that as a justification to invade Serbia. And Germany took Serbia's invasion as a cue to invade Luxembourg and Belgium? Yeah, Belgium. Okay. I couldn't remember if it was Belgium or Bavaria, but Bavaria is a state of Germany now. Or it was then. Anyway, they used that as an opportunity to invade Belgium and Luxembourg, and they moved on past them because you got Germany, you've got those two countries, and then after that you have France. So they moved past Luxembourg and Belgium and took parts of France. That's what World War I was about. Hitler was in World War I, and chemical weapons were allowed at the time because there was no Geneva Convention yet. So chemical weapons were being used on people, and Hitler was a victim of a gas attack, if you could call it that. They dropped gas in his trench, and he tried to fit his gas mask on, and it wouldn't fit exactly right, and he succumbed to the gas attack. Ended up in the hospital for a few weeks till he got better. When he got back, he whipped people into a blood frenzy over the Jews by saying that the people at the top who control everything, populist language, that sound familiar? The elites. The people at the top are all Jewish, and they are war hungry. If we had just gassed 6,000 specific people before World War I, we wouldn't be dealing with gas in the field now, that was his justification. So we need to gas all these bad people. That's how he got from A to B, if you were wondering. So he constantly blames 6,000 Jewish elites, but then killed 6 million.
Today, we are merely paying this people what it deserves. When the German nation was, thanks to the inflation instigated and carried through by Jews, deprived of the entire savings which it had accumulated in years of honest work.
Inflation was completely out of control in Germany. The highest inflation rate in recorded human history ever. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles was signed to bring it to an end. And part of the Treaty of Versailles was an agreement that they would pay reparations to the countries that they invaded and hurt and cost money, basically. And the gold mark went from $200 or 200 gold marks per dollar, per US dollar, to 500 per US dollar. That's like a 200% jump. And then it went to 1,000 per US dollar. And then 1,000,000 per US dollar. And then 1,000,000,000. And then 1,000,000,000,000. Destitute doesn't even begin to describe the country of Germany after World War I. They finally pulled themselves out of it by creating a new currency that was tied to the price of gold. It was tied to a gold standard. The U.S. dropped off of the gold standard around that time, I think, and the dollar continued to get more and more powerful. So it became kind of the U.S. So it became the world reserve currency over time. That's what it is today, the world reserve currency. People base their money on the dollar rather than gold. Anyway, that's what he's talking about here. So he says the Jews that are in power, the elites, really. Replace Jews with the elites in this talk if it kind of helps you, put yourself in that mindset. I'm trying to, help you understand where he was and how he got there so that we don't get there again, right? Understanding history is important for that reason. The elites caused hyperinflation and emptied our bank accounts as a result, made our money worthless, and we have to deal with this elite problem, basically, is what Hitler was saying. Of course, he wanted to do it by killing them. That's an absolutely unacceptable situation, and Jews weren't doing that. Neither were the elites. Anyway, keep listening.
Deprived of the entire savings which it had accumulated in years of honest work, when the rest of the world took away the German nation's foreign investments, when we were divested of the whole of our colonial possessions, these philanthropic considerations evidently carried little noticeable weight with democratic...
Wow, this guy's got one hell of a vocabulary. I'm sorry, I got to step back and listen to this one more time.
...savings which it had accumulated in years of honest work.
Okay, people of Germany accumulated savings through years of honest work.
When the rest of the world took away the German nation's foreign investments, when we were divested of the whole of our colonial possessions...
Right. They had all their stuff taken from overseas to pay for the reparations.
These philanthropic considerations evidently carried little noticeable weight with democratic statesmen.
This didn't matter to anybody who was part of the government. By the way, the government in Germany at the time was nearly identical to the U.S. government. It had multiple branches, and it had a leader at the top, and it had a Congress, and the whole 9 yards. That should help give even more context to the whole situation.
Today, I can only assure these gentlemen that thanks to the brutal education with which the democracies favored us for 15 years, we are completely hardened to all attacks of sentiment.
He's saying, thanks to the fact that other democracies view Germany as so great and powerful and big, no one has sympathy for us. Wow, that's one way to put it. Okay.
Completely hardened to all attacks of sentiment. After more than 800,000 children of the nation had died of hunger and undernourishment at the close of the war, we witnessed almost 1 million head of milking cows being driven away from us in accordance with the cruel paragraphs of a dictate which the humane democratic apostles of the world forced upon us as a peace treaty.
Talking about the Treaty of Versailles. This is where they were forced to pay reparations for what they did in World War I. In all fairness, Germany did not start World War I, but they perpetuated it even harder. And if they could have, they would have taken France and Britain and all of Europe, and Russia too. In fact, they probably would have taken China if they could. China was on the Ally side. I think they contributed 40,000 troops to the fight or something. They were fighting Japan primarily, who was on the Axis side, who was on Hitler's side at the time. Anyway, Hitler was trying to take everything,
which the humane democratic apostles of the world forced upon us as a peace treaty.
Germany was trying to take everything from everybody. As a result, I have very little sympathy. They cost the world an obscene amount of money. They should have been forced to pay it back. I get hyperinflation. I understand. So maybe push the reparations payments back 5 years. And that's what happened. They renegotiated the reparations deal to push it back 5 years.
We witnessed over 1 million German prisoners of war being retained in confinement for no reason at all.
No reason at all, yeah. German prisoners of war. No reason. Why would anybody, the Germans weren't even over there. They just came to our country and grabbed them and left. Really? They're over there for absolutely no reason? Nothing? Okay.
1 million German prisoners of war being retained in confinement for no reason at all for a whole year after the war was ended. We witnessed...
Yeah, they should have released them, if that's even true. But Hitler had a tendency to twist and distort things completely out of proportion and sometimes outright lie about stuff. So be skeptical.
For no reason at all, for a whole year after the war was ended, we witnessed over 1.5 million Germans being torn away from all that they possessed in the territories lying on our frontiers and being whipped out with practically only what they wore on their backs.
He's saying Germans were stripped of everything that they had on their frontiers. That's because it wasn't your land. Are you serious? You took someone else's land and they took it back. And now you're bitching about it. Come on. That's my interpretation of it. Is that a historian in the comments? Please tell me, is that right? It sounds like this dude's complaining that he took land and then it was taken back. And now the people who took it first are left with nothing. Are you kidding me? They didn't have anything in the first place.
On our frontiers and being whipped out with practically only what they wore on their backs. We had to endure having millions of our fellow countrymen torn from us without their consent and without their being afforded the slightest possibility of existence.
Yeah, that's why we have the Geneva Conventions now. Geneva Conventions are important. It dictates how prisoners of war are treated internationally. And guess who violated that flagrantly? The U.S. through their torture program. That's illegal. Internationally illegal. George Bush should be in prison. Honestly, maybe Obama should be too. Donald Trump definitely should be in prison. International prison. The International Criminal Court should have filed warrants against these people a long time ago, but the U.S. is so powerful they didn't want to do that. It's sad.
I could supplement these examples with dozens of the most cruel kind. For this reason, we ask to be spared all sentimental talk.
Is he saying, I could go on and on about this. So I'm asking you to spare me of your sympathy, or of your pity, I think is what he's saying here.
For this reason, we ask to be spared all sentimental talk. The German nation does not wish its interests to be determined and controlled by any foreign nation, France to the French, England to the English.
Oh, no, he's saying, don't give us your pity money, I guess.
America to the Americans and Germany to the Germans. We are resolved to prevent the settlement in our country of a strange people which was capable of snatching for itself all the leading positions in the land.
Okay, so 1939, January 30th. At this moment, I believe Germany's economy was actually doing really, really well. I'm sure you guys probably heard of the stock market crash of 1929, Black Tuesday, the time that everything came falling down in the U.S. That was international, too. I found that out recently. Germany was heavily affected. Actually, Germany did pretty well in the late 20s, and then in the 30s, in the late 20s, like 29, 30, 31, there was a depression. This is German economic growth from 1930 to 1950. Germany dealt with a depression in the early 30s, the late 20s, just like the U.S. did, just like the rest of the world did. So you can see it starting to fall in 1930, 1931, and then it starts coming back up, 32, 33, all the way to 1939. If you look where my mouse is here, if you're watching this, you'll see right here, this is like a steep incline that it was on. And it would continue on to incline until 1944, halfway through 1943, I guess, when it took a steep drop. Hitler was killed in 1945, April 1945, yeah. Hitler was born on April 20th, 420, and he died on April 30th, apparently. Anyway, 1945 is where he died, and World War II officially came to an end, and it was just on a steep slope from there. 1946, 47, it started coming up in 48, 49, 50. But the point is that at this moment in history, when this speech is being given, Germany was doing really well compared to what they had been doing previously. Hitler took complete control in 1933 through the Enabling Act, roughly right here. It was early 1933. He was the dictator from that moment forward. I think it was between March and May when he officially took control. And he had a highway system built and had a whole bunch of like inventions and all kinds of stuff. He made Germany into a world power and pulled them out of a depression and pulled them out of hyperinflation and everything else. He did that through war and genocide, so obviously not justified. But his actions led to this steep slope upward that you're seeing here. So in 1939, Hitler had nothing to complain about. No one had anything to complain about in Germany. They were doing really well. He's just calling back to a time when things were bad, I guess.
Which was capable of snatching for itself all the leading positions in the land and to oust it. For it is our will to educate our own nation for these leading positions. We have hundreds of thousands of very intelligent children of peasants and of the working classes.
So Jews should be peasants. Our peasants should be aristocrats or whatever. They should be in these positions of authority, creating a second-class citizenship. Does this sound familiar at all? If not, let me just play something for you. I typed Kanye Jew into my clips, and it came up with like a billion things. I'm not looking... Should be more specific. Hold on, let me find it. Here. Kanye West talking about how to deal with the Jewish question. Remember, he's anti-Semitic. He's an extremist. He loves Hitler, if you don't remember any of this from a couple years ago. Just a quick reminder here. This is all from early December 2022. I think December 1st.
Can we just kind of say, like, you like the uniforms, but that's about it?
There's a lot of things that I love about Hitler. A lot of things.
You see Nick Fuentes on the right bobbing his head?
Hitler. A lot.
Like a chicken eating feed or something.
A lot of things. Hey, Netten, what did you think about that, Netten?
Yeah, anyway, he goes off into another direction. The point is that Kanye West loves Hitler, right? And then Kanye West comes out here and says this. This one is from early December, not long after that last one. Guy that's interviewing him is on screen here. This is Gavin McInnes. He's creator of Proud Boys and creator of Vice News, fascinatingly. Far-right extremist. And he's, of course, anti-Semitic to the degree that he hates all minorities, but he's not specifically anti-Semitic. And he's trying to get Kanye to stop being specifically anti-Semitic and hating Hitler. Listen to this.
But they don't deserve to be in charge of everything because they don't
talking about Jews.
Put Christ.
Well, how do you legislate that?
They need to work for Christians. Jews should work for Christians. I'll hire a Jewish person in a second.
Are you drawing connections here? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? He wants to create a second-class citizenry. Does that sound familiar?
If I knew they weren't a spy and I could look through their phone and follow them to their house and have a camera all in their living room.
They're laughing at this. This is crazy. Are they laughing because it's crazy? That's why I'm laughing. He goes on to say this intervention isn't going very well. Gavin McInnes does. Yeah, I think he was laughing because it's so ridiculous. He's literally outlining exactly what Hitler did and what he wants to do to Jews in the U.S. Kanye is. Dictators throughout history have used Hitler as a blueprint for how to kind of create a dictatorship and control your area. Not because he was the first. He wasn't by any stretch of the imagination, but he specialized in it. He looked into propaganda techniques used in the past, and he looked into how to grab people by the heart, really pull on it, you know? While he was in prison for high treason in the mid-20s, he wrote about his plans at length. We have the letters today.
hundreds of thousands of very intelligent children of peasants and of the working classes. We shall have them educated. In fact, we have already begun, and we wish that one day they, and not the representatives of an alien race, may hold the leading positions in the state.
An alien race. That sound familiar? Illegal aliens? Any of this sounding familiar at all?
And not the representatives of an alien race may hold the leading positions in the state together with our educated classes. Above all, German culture, as its name alone shows, is German and not Jewish, and therefore its management and care will be entrusted to members of our own nation. If the rest of the world cries out with a hypocritical mien against this barbaric expulsion from Germany of such an irreplaceable and culturally eminently valuable element, we can only be astonished at the conclusions they draw from this situation.
Fascinatingly, Hitler was from Austria-Hungary, from, southeast, I believe, of Germany. And he was drafted into World War I. Well, they were in Austria. They called him up for the draft. He shows up. He wanted to fight. They did a physical on him. They said he can't join. He's not physically fit enough. He skipped town, moved to Germany, signed up for the military there, and they said, yeah, okay, get in the fight. No one thought to check his citizenship. They didn't check until later. He had to get his citizenship in Germany before he could become any kind of politician, really, beyond just a party leader. So anyway, I don't want to hear any of this bullshit about pure-blooded Germans. Hitler did not fit that style, that stereotype at all. He was not blonde hair or blue-eyed, and he wasn't even German. But, it's like Donald Trump talking about being a strong man, talking about having big hands or being powerful or whatever. He's a feeble old man. Give me a break. Literally anybody could, knock the guy over, okay? He's not this big, strong, powerful person. He's a scumbag, just like Hitler was a scumbag and not a big, powerful person.
Barbaric expulsion from Germany of such an irreplaceable and culturally eminently valuable element, we can only be astonished at the conclusions they draw from this situation. For how thankful they must be that we are releasing these precious apostles of culture and placing them at the disposal of the rest of the world.
So everyone is so upset that the Jews are being mistreated. Why don't they just take them in? These people are apostles of culture. They don't deserve to die, so you take them, is what he's saying. What a scumbag, dude. That doesn't even begin to touch this guy. And this is before World War II happened. This is when, I think we're at 1932 Germany. Culturally, we are at 1933 or 1934. But we haven't given over the country. We haven't given over to a dictator. That happened in 33 for Germany. But the degree of hate spreading through the U.S. is ramping up like we're going toward the 33, 34. It's crazy. Anyway, I know everybody recognizes Hitler as a scumbag, but leading up to this, genocide wasn't really viewed the same way at the time. And I don't think he was really, no one was accusing him of committing genocide. They were just accusing him of mistreating people and not giving others the opportunity to rise up and succeed, having second-class citizens. At best. The U.S. didn't even give a shit. The U.S. was also anti-Semitic. In the 30s, there were ships full of Jews, refugees who were running from Germany, coming to the U.S., and they were turned around. They were sent back. So very few people really cared about the Jews. If Germany had stayed in their little area and not tried to take France, again, nothing would have happened, probably. They would have just exterminated all Jews in the area and moved on with their lives, sadly. Anyway, keep listening here.
Precious apostles of culture and placing them at the disposal of the rest of the world. In accordance with their own declarations, they cannot find a single reason to excuse themselves for refusing to receive this most valuable race in their own countries, nor can
Nobody can find a reason to accept Jews. They can't find an excuse to reject them either, I guess.
I see a reason why the members of this race should be imposed upon the German nation, while in the States, which are so enthusiastic about these splendid people, their settlement should suddenly be refused with every imaginable excuse. I think that the sooner this problem is solved, the better for Europe.
The problem to which he's referring is what he called the Jewish question. How do we resolve the Jewish question? It was veiled language. It was couched in a less abrasive way. The Jewish question. That's not really, that's not abrasive, right? That's just framing it completely differently. But The answer to the Jewish question in Hitler's mind was the final solution. Also not an abrasive term, but both of those things added up to genocide.
Cannot settle down until the Jewish question is cleared up.
There you go, Jewish question.
It may very well be possible that sooner or later an agreement on this problem may be reached in Europe, even between those nations which otherwise do not so easily come together. The world has sufficient space for settlements, but we must once and for all get rid of the opinion that the Jewish race was only created by God for the purpose of being in a certain percentage a parasite living on the body and the productive work of other nations.
Having more people in an economy is beneficial to the economy. An economy rises when there are more workers in it. Now, if workers are being fired or they don't have jobs generally, they become a drain on the economy, and it gets really difficult. That's why we have to keep unemployment at a low level, at 3 to 5% preferably. You don't want it to be zero, because then people aren't chasing their dreams, for example, quitting their jobs, moving to California, creating artistic studios, or becoming scientists or whatever. But having Jews in Germany was a good thing. It would have been good for the German economy. You know the real problem? It wasn't the Jews, it was the unemployment rate. Just like the United States, it's not immigrants that are a problem. And it's not even the unemployment rate that's a problem. That's a fine rate. Inflation rate is fine right now. What's really the problem in the United States specifically is how low wages are compared to how much wealth the wealthy own. The poor don't own any wealth. In fact, they owe wealth, an average of like $6,000 or something. If Germany had just created jobs, not second-class citizen positions, but jobs for everybody, everything would have exploded. In the U.S. too, it's good to have immigrants. As a matter of fact, the U.S. is going to have to take immigrants in sometime in the near future because population is stagnating, population growth. It's peaking, and then it's going to go down. Right now, we're somewhere around 8 billion people. It's reaching its top. It'll probably peak at 10 to 12 billion at most in the world, and then it's going to plummet. It's already plummeting in China. When that happens, there won't be enough workers being added to the economy to pay for the Social Security or the healthcare programs or whatever that are necessary for the older generation. So they're going to be like, for example, 10 million older people pulling from Social Security and only 5 million younger people adding to Social Security. And there won't be enough for everybody. So we need to bring immigrants in rapidly, right now. We need to swing those borders wide open. Seriously, I'm not even joking right now. China and Russia have to birth their way out of this situation. Russia is paying women $10,000 per kid that they have. So to encourage them to have more and more and more children. That's what Germany was trying to do. Have more kids. Create a new master race, as many as you possibly can. We don't have to do that here. We just bring people in. Qualified workers who can do anything. You know, construction workers, plumbers, carpenters, people of all different types come into the U.S. And if nothing else, they're just normal laborers. They can work on a farm or whatever. But the Republican Party is demonizing immigrants the same way that Hitler demonized Jews. The same way.
Created by God for the purpose of being in a certain percentage a parasite living on the body and the productive work of other nations. The Jewish race will have to adapt itself to sound constructive activity as other nations do, or sooner or later it will succumb to a crisis of an inconceivable magnitude.
So I'm trying to understand, is he saying that if he doesn't solve the Jewish question, as he's putting it, if he doesn't genocide a bunch of people, then he's going to face a catastrophic situation? Well, it seems like that's what he's doing. He's creating a catastrophic situation and murdering a bunch of people.
This race will have to adapt itself to sound constructive activity as other nations do, or sooner or later it will succumb to a crisis of an inconceivable magnitude.
Yeah, he's creating that crisis.
One thing I should like to say on this day, which may be memorable for others as well as for us Germans, in the course of my life, I have very often been a prophet and have usually been ridiculed for it.
A prophet? He used to use common religious tropes. Like he didn't usually appeal to religion specifically, but he'd structure his speeches to kind of communicate a religious nature. Like he'd talk about the fall and then redemption. I was low and I was crushed and hurt by the Jewish people, and then I was redeemed and brought up and made more powerful, that kind of thing. But he never specifically or explicitly talked about the Christian God at the very least. I think he may have said God a few times. I think he did in this, as a matter of fact. So I'm not sure what he's saying here.
Very often been a prophet.
Well, I don't know what that word meant, prophet, in this context, in this era, in this language. Is he saying that he, predicted the future? Not, from God, but predicted what was going to happen, but he's using it in, a religious term? Is this one of those examples where he uses religious language? Maybe so.
In the course of my life, I have very often been a prophet and have usually been ridiculed for it. During the time of my struggle for power, it was in the first instance the Jewish race which only received my prophecies with laughter when I said that...
Yeah, he's using it in place of prediction. That's fascinating. So he's using religious language to pull people in.
The Jewish race which only received my prophecies with laughter when I said that I would one day take over the leadership of the state, and with it, that of the whole nation, and that I would then, among many other things, settle the Jewish problem. Their laughter was uproarious, but I think that for some time now, they have been laughing on the other side of their face. Today,
They've laughing on the other side of their face. What does that mean? That's a weird saying. I've never heard that.
I think that for some time now, they have been laughing on the other side of their face. Today, I will once more be a prophet. If the international Jewish financiers in and outside Europe should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war.
Why would anybody once more into a world war? It's the Jews' fault that Germany went to war twice. Really? That's what he's saying right now. Jews were not trying to create a world war twice. He lived in an alternate universe. Or at least he created an alternate universe for others to live in. I don't know if he lived there himself. Probably.
Then the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth, and thus the victory of...
Bolshevization. The Bolshevik Party was the Communist Party, or what the Communist Party was before it was the Communist Party in Russia. So Bolsheviks were communists. Hitler demonized Marxism, communism, and Darwinism constantly. And Nietzscheism, he said. That's all he talked about. Does that sound familiar? This is Hank Kunneman from January 29th, 2024. He's a close friend of Kenneth Copeland and some other really big televangelists. He is a televangelist in his own right. He owns this whole big network.
Now let's go back to Genesis 9. Now watch what happens. Verse 21, he's uncovered. Look at verse 22. You have to understand what is going on here. Because this is going to show you the origins of abortion, false religion, globalism, communism, socialism, transgenderism, Freemasonry. Come on, all.
I mean, is this sounding familiar at all? Literally words out of Hitler's mouth. He, in the 1930s, the reason he got the Enabling Act passed that gave him complete power, gave him the ability to write laws, the reason he got that in the first place, because he talked the already pretty far right president, his boss, into dissolving the Reichstag, the capital, basically starting new elections, not dissolving the government in the traditional sense, but forcing new elections is what that means. He talked the active president who appointed him chancellor into holding new elections because communists were trying to take over. That's all the dude talked about. That's how he whipped people into a blood frenzy. Seriously. Is this sounding familiar?
Jury, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. The nations are no longer willing to die on the battlefield so that this unstable international race may profiteer from a war or satisfy its Old Testament vengeance.
Okay, I'm sorry. 1 second.
The victory of Jewry, but the annihilation.
Jewry, Jewry. That's the word he's using. Sounds like jury, but the state of being Jewish, I guess, is what it means.
Of the Jewish race in Europe, the nations are no longer willing to die on the battlefield so that this unstable international race may profiteer from a war or satisfy its Old Testament vengeance. The Jewish watchword, workers of the world unite, will be conquered by a higher realization, namely, workers of all classes and of all nations, recognize your common enemy.
Oh, fascinating. So the point behind this whole thing, ultimately, is that Hitler picked out a group that he didn't like specifically and got people to believe that they were the source of all problems, everything. In reality, Jews were already being demonized in Europe before Hitler came along. they were already second-class citizens in a lot of places. They were already a drain on the system because Germany refused to allow them to just do their thing and work in normal jobs like everybody else. Germany mistreated them terribly, not just Germany either, other European countries. So they're the perfect target for Hitler's ire. He's the perfect target to weaponize hate and anger. Start spreading populist language being a rhetoric style, saying the elites are causing all of our problems. We need to stop the elites from having all of this wealth and causing wars and everything. A sentiment that I agree with in the United States, and maybe it was true in Germany at the time, I don't know. But superimposing that stereotype onto a specific group of people like the Jews is how Hitler got people whipped into a blood frenzy over it. Anyway, anytime you hear populist language like that about elites controlling everything, pulling strings like puppet masters, whoever it happens to be, Jewish people or whatever, be skeptical. Bernie Sanders used it. I agree with him on that. But it's also used to get people upset, get them into an emotional high that can be manipulated. So keep a lookout for that kind of thing. Because, you know, the reason that it worked is because it's such a common, popular method of grabbing people's attention. Make them feel lost and empty and make them feel like you're the only source that can fill them. That's what Hitler did. That's what Donald Trump does. And we have to keep a lookout for it. Tell me what you think in the comments. Hitler believing an idea has an origin doesn't mean that the idea doesn't have that origin. You can't just point to anything Hitler believed because he did and believe the opposite. No, definitely not. I didn't say that. All I heard was anytime you hear blank, be suspicious. You should be suspicious. I'm not saying you should believe the opposite. I said be suspicious, or actually I said be skeptical. Think about it. You know what? Maybe Jews are running the world. That's possible. I'm not discounting it, but be real skeptical. Before you propose that idea, research it heavily, because that kind of accusation is serious for anybody. You claim Mexicans are running the world, that's a big fucking deal. You claim that Catholics are controlling things like puppet masters, that's a big fucking deal. You can't just come out and claim that brazenly without any evidence at all. Well, you shouldn't, at least. You're not seeing how this sounds familiar? This is on Twitch, by the way. Mass Creation Broadcasts. So I'm not seeing how this is familiar. Really? Doesn't sound like Hitler at all? What are you talking about? Bro, what is going on right now? This raspy, rough voice that you hear with Hitler here?
To die on the battlefield so that this unstable...
That's not what he sounded like 24/7. That was at the crescendo of his speeches. Another thing that Hitler did commonly was he'd start out with a normal tone. My friends, come here today to talk about a solemn, difficult subject. And he would work up to a crescendo throughout the speech until he was slamming his hands on the lectern and yelling like this. In the process of doing so, working people into an emotional state. He's carrying a crowd along with him on an emotional journey. He's reaching the crescendo in the original audio in this part right here.
Meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin.
See what he's doing with his fists there? That's the kind of tactic that Hitler used when giving speeches. And it was extremely effective. Other people employed that later too. There's another guy, I forget. He was... maybe he was like the president of Germany, just like the person that appointed Hitler to the chancellor. Kind of like a prime minister. Von Hindenburg, I'm sorry. President von Hindenburg was his name. Maybe it was him. He ran against Hitler. He was a far-right candidate, but Hitler was even further right. And I believe it was him that employed this whole slamming your fists down and pulling your collar open and getting your tie off and basically dressing like the common man, taking your jacket off. You're not this special person. Now you're a normal common man. You're a blue-collar worker. That's what they did. That's how they appealed to the common man while being an elite. You think Hitler wasn't filthy rich? Oh, he was filthy rich. There's nothing about Hitler that was common man or von Hindenburg or any of the other leaders in Germany. Talk about elite. He was an elite. And he knew all of the elites in Europe, too. And he knew they weren't Jewish. Hitler was a chancellor. He was appointed by the president. The president was voted in. The government operated very much like the U.S. government today. They voted in a capital, or they voted in congressmen, and the congressmen went to the Capitol building to vote on laws and stuff. They were called the Reichstag members, and they went to the Reichstag building. There were also something kind of like senators. Reichsrat is what it was called. Reichsrat. Reich means empire. The Reichstag would propose bills. They'd write bills and propose them and vote on them. And the chancellor was like a prime minister or like a president who was actually appointed and could be removed. And the chancellor had a vote in Congress and everything. Eventually, after the Enabling Act of 1933, Hitler gave himself complete power. He was now the leader. And von Hindenburg was still technically the leader and could still do a lot of things, like control the military, but he ceded power completely to Hitler. And Hitler basically didn't mention him in his speeches ever again after that. He didn't demonize him like he did with every other political opponent he had, but he didn't speak highly of him either. And today, von Hindenburg is viewed as the person who enabled this whole thing, who set up the pieces that created the conditions that allowed Hitler to come to power in the first place, basically. According to my history teacher in high school, by the end of his speeches, he'd have spat buckets. Oh, I hadn't heard that. Interesting. A fascinating period of time and very valuable for us to understand today, in my opinion. Hitler gained wealth, but through the selling of his book. Okay, well, wealth aside, he was wealthy, but wealth aside, he was powerful, more importantly, and he knew everybody. Also, his book, I thought about getting his book, Mein Kampf, meaning my struggle, my fight. By the way, dude ruined that title for books, right? I have a fight too. I can't name my book that anymore because this asshole came along and named his book My Fight. His book, I thought about getting it. It's a screed of nonsense from what I've heard. I haven't even bothered, but from what I've read, it's just ravings of a madman. And there's no historical value that you can really pull from it. Unless you really do view the world through Hitler's eyes, and nobody does, and nobody should. All right, listen to this for just a second. Hang on.
Meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe. German compatriots, National Socialists, 12 years ago when...
Just a little context on this. Socialism was not what we understand it to be today. Completely different. Socialism at the time, in the era, was really just being in favor of social programs, like unemployment insurance was big. It was the party of the blue-collar worker, basically, socialism was. It had nothing to do with communism, completely unconnected. Today, the Republican Party has inextricably linked the two. Our modern definition of socialism, and a more historically faithful translation, would be our exact system that we have right now, except instead of having a system where Mark Zuckerberg owns all the Facebook stock, everybody gets a little piece of the stock, and a union is baked right into it. It's called a co-op, where you vote on who your boss is going to be, and the people above them vote on their boss, and above them vote on their boss. And if the company does well, then everybody gets a raise. The company does poorly, everybody gets a pay cut. You have an investment in the company. That's a co-op, and that's socialism. Worker-owned means of production and supply. In a communist system, the government owns that and sets the prices for everything, sets the wages and all of that stuff. Communism's never been implemented as it is in the literature, but I'm not even sure that it would really work properly if it were. I don't know. Socialism would definitely work.
As the leader of the strongest party, I was entrusted by the deceased Reich President von Hindenburg with the office of Chancellor. Germany found herself faced with the same situation.
This is early 1933.
Internally.
I'm sorry. The speech is The speech is January 30th, 1945. He's referring to a time in early 1933 when he was appointed chancellor.
Germany found herself faced with the same situation internally as the one that today faces it externally.
Anyway, it's just fascinating time. Really, really interesting stuff, in my opinion.